Hello again. Welcome to our virtual classroom. This lesson is for Wednesday, April 22nd. Wednesday, April 22nd. We're going to be going over histograms, which are actually very simple. This will be a fairly short lesson. We're going to do most, if not all of it together as you follow along. So I do encourage you to download or at least be looking at the notes that I have on Schoology for this specific lesson, as that is what I'm going to be using for this lesson. With that in mind, let me share my screen. We are going to be starting on page, I believe it's 397. So here is my textbook. This is what that is going to be looking like. And so we are going to be using, for example, these set of numbers that are right between number 1 and number 2. You can do number 1 on your own. If you have any questions, we can go over it during our actual video conference. And so we are going to be doing numbers 1 through 5, as well as number 14, and then 16 and 17, which 15, even though it's not on the submission, we are going to be dealing with it a little bit. So just so you have an idea of what we are going to be going over. So with that in mind, let me share my little board. So looking at the notes, this is what we have. So as you can see, we are doing histograms. This is our 55th lesson, pages 397 to 400, and numbers 1 through 5, 14, and 16 through 17. And so with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing that I want to do is review the different kinds of variables that we have in statistics. And so those being categorical variables and numerical variables. So looking at categorical variables, remember, it's things like names or labels for things. For example, your favorite ice cream flavor. That is a variable because it will change depending on who you ask. But it's simply a category. You can have chocolate, you can have vanilla, you can have birthday cake or whatever. There is no number that means anything that is associated with that. You can also say, what month were you born? You know, January, February, March, April, May. You don't measure those. It is simply a label given to you that. Whereas a numerical variable, that is a variable that you can either count or measure. Count or measure. So think of something, yeah, like when you're measuring something with a ruler or with the temperature, time, if you're counting the number of pieces of gum, or if you're counting the number of stairs on a stadium, things like that. Those are all countable, measurable. So those would be numerical variables. All right, so with categorical variables, we use bar charts. We've seen a bar chart. We actually did that when we were still in class at school. But today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be using a histogram, which looks a lot like a bar chart, but it's not. It has some subtle differences, and we're going to be going over those differences. The biggest difference being that we use a bar chart for categorical data, whereas we use a histogram for numerical data, just as we use dot plots. And in fact, we're going to be looking at how when you are working with numerical data, you can use a dot plot or a histogram. They are actually very similar, even though they look a little bit different. Okay, so with that in mind, let's start with those numbers right above number 2. So looking at that data, I believe this represents the number of pieces of gum. So the number of pieces of gum that a certain group of individuals chew per day. So that is our variable, number of pieces of gum. Notice that you can count those. So we are dealing with numerical data. And the first thing that we need to do is create a dot plot. And so I already did that for you, but you can do so in your own notebook so you can follow along. So again, we start with a number line. We make lines for each of the values. So starting with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is possible in that set of people that there wasn't like anyone that chewed only 2 pieces of gum. But as we can see in this particular data set, there was at least one person that chewed anywhere from 0 to 5. You could see that there was at least one data set. All right. So let's make a dot plot. So every time I saw 0, I put a dot right there. So I saw 0 right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's where these 5 dots came from. For 1, I saw that there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's where these 8 dots came from, etc. So you should know how to make a dot plot already. But ladies and gentlemen, if we wanted to change this dot plot into a histogram, this is what you would have to do, ladies and gentlemen. So firstly, we would make an actual, a full chart. It wouldn't just be the number line, but it would be the x-axis and the y-axis. Now, on the y-axis, we would actually write down number of pieces of gum. Sorry, we would write down number of pieces of gum goes on the bottom, because it could be 1 piece, 2 piece, 3 piece, 4 pieces. That's what these numbers actually mean. And so right here on the bottom, I'm actually going to write down number of pieces chewed. And again, we're talking about gum. And on my y-axis, I'm going to put the word frequency. Now, frequency simply means how often is this happening? How often is that scenario actually happening? Let me see if I can turn this around. I don't know if I can. Okay, so I can't, but over here on this side, we have the frequency. So that's going to be our y-axis, and we're going to go by 1. So we have a frequency of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Obviously, it's a little small, so I can't, but just know that I'm going by ones. And to make a histogram, I'm going to make bars that go up to where it was. So in this case, we had 5, I believe, so it's going to go all the way up to 5, and then we're going to do that. Over here, so I'm just going to go by 2s. So here is 2, 4, 6, 8, etc. Okay, so this one goes up to 8. So I'm going to make, I'm sorry, this is not very pretty. A bar, so to speak, that goes up to 8. And then this one goes up to 3. So I'm going to make a bar that goes up to 3. And this one was 4, so a bar that goes up to 4. This one was 2, a bar 2, and a bar at 1. Now, you might say, well, Mr. Lugo, this looks a lot like a bar chart. It does. Visually, it looks a lot like a bar chart. However, one of the biggest visual differences is that between a histogram and a bar chart is that with a histogram, we don't have spaces in between the bars. The bars are literally touching one another. The reason for that, ladies and gentlemen, is that from 0 to 1, there's no space. From 1 to 2, there's no space. It's a continuous. The data is going in chronological order. Okay, I know that. Sorry, that was a bit confusing. But yes, in a bar chart, since we're using categorical data, in a bar chart, down here, we wouldn't have any numbers. It would be something like favorite ice cream flavor. And again, you could put vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry in any order, it doesn't matter. However, since we are using numbers, since we are using numerical data, it has to go from 0 and then 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then 5. All right, that is the reason why the bars are put together. That didn't make any sense to you. Just know that with a histogram, it is for numerical data and the bars will be touching. The bars will be touching. Whereas in a bar chart, the bars will not. So histogram, yes, they are touching. Bar chart, no. Okay. Now moving on. Let me just clear some of these things. We can delete this and we can delete this. Okay. So next, they ask us to make a frequency table, and that's pretty simple. Essentially, we have our number of pieces of gum down here, anywhere from 0 to 5, going downward. And our frequency is how many times did we see that? For example, we can say, well, how many times did someone chew 0 pieces of gum? And so that would be, how many people chewed 0 pieces of gum is a better way to say it. Would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be 5. How many people chewed 1? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so I'm going to put an 8 right here. How many people chewed 2? That would be 3 people chewed 2 pieces of gum. How many people chewed 3 pieces? That would be 4. I got that from right here. How many people chewed 4? That was 2. And how many people chewed 5? That is 1. And so that's where that frequency came from. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. No, there we go. Okay. All right. And then moving on. Let's go. So, and then even looking at number 5, did I miss anything? I don't believe so. No, it's simply drawing the rectangle. So on the, it's essentially what we did up here with the dot plot. So we're fine. Okay, so moving on to number 14. Number 14, in number 14, you're gonna see a table, which I have already drawn up here. And what they ask us to do is to use this data to answer the following questions, essentially. So this represents students, and those students were asked the question, how many stairways are there in your house? Basically, how many stairways are there in your house? And so this person, for example, had 4, this next one had 0, this next one had 0. So you see the number represents one person, but how many stairways are in that person's house? That is how this works. Okay, and so we're going to make a frequency table, as I have done so down here, and we're going to fill that in. So how many people, yes, how many people had 0 stairways? And so let's count the number of zeros. So we have 1, 2, and that's it. There's 2. So I'm going to put a 2 right here. Next, how many people had 1 stairway? And so I see there's 1, and that's it. So only one person had 1 stairway. Next, how many people had 2 stairways? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's going to be 8. So I'm going to write 8 down here. Okay, how many people had 3 stairways? I see 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to put a 3 right here. How many people had 4 stairways? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 people had 4. So I'm going to write 4. And finally, how many people had 5 stairways? And we have 1, and that's it. So just one person had 5 stairways. So frequency, again, is how many people experience this condition. So 2 people had 0 stairways. That is the first one. And the next one, we have 1 person had 1 stairways. The next one, 8 people had 2. 3 people had 3, 4 people had 4, and 1 person had 5 stairways. Pretty simple. Now, using that same information, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to make a histogram. Okay, I know I kind of shifted this a little bit, so let me rewrite this. So we had 2, 1, 8, 3, 4, and 1, I believe. 3, 4, and 1. Okay, so how are we going to label these? So number of stairways is going to be on the bottom. Just a little bit. So number of stairways. So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually labeling my axis. So the x-axis represents the number of stairways, and the y-axis is simply the frequency. So I'm going to write frequency, meaning how many times did I see that condition happen? How many people had that certain number of stairways? So I'm going to write frequency. And that's going to be on the y-axis. And we're going to go by, let's go by ones. So, you know what? Let's go by twos. 2, 4, 6, and 8. Okay. So 0. So there's nothing there. We had 2 people. So that's going to go up to 2. I made my first bar. 1 was 1 person, so that's going to be down here. 2 was 8, so that's going to go all the way up here. That is very bad. There we go. So it's going to go all the way up to 8. 3, we had 3 people, so 1, 2, 3. 4, we had 4, and 5, we had 1. And there it is. There is my histogram. There is my histogram. Let me see if there's anything else that I need. No, that's pretty much it. It's very simple. We're going to be discussing this at our next meeting. And again, for this next meeting, our theme is hoods. So come wearing your favorite hoodie or cloak, I guess. I guess that would also count. And so I will see you at the Zoom meeting. We are going to be using Zoom. And then Friday, we'll talk about the new program that we'll be using besides Zoom. All right. Okay. We'll see you then, ladies and gentlemen.